Good morning, Moray Rabotai. We are continuing on Masechet Avodah Zarah, and we are on Daf Chaf Dalit, Amud Bet, 16 lines from the top of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned for the zchut of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. They should be safe and sound for all the Asirei Yisrael, all the Chayrei Yisrael, all the people who have been wounded, and of course for the tremendous Hatzlacha in all of their endeavors. The Amud is also being learned for zchut of Yusha ben Diana, Yael bat Rivka, Menashe ben Asi, and Leilui Nishmat, Menashe ben Yaakov, and Sadaf Simcha bat Faribatila Eden, and Abraham ben Esther, and Farzanet Diana bat Victoria, that their neshamot should have an aliyah. Amen. Amen. So we are amidst a Gemara that basically was a digression from our Avodah Zarah sugya. We had a question of whether or not you could buy an animal from an Oved Kochavim because they're not as careful in bestialities. Who knows what has happened to this animal? And an animal that has been subjected to that, if it has been sodomized, you cannot bring it as a korban on Mizbech. That we know. So the question was, our Mishnah started saying that you cannot leave your animal with a goyim because of this, because for Bnei Noach, even though that they don't have Tariag mitzvot, but they have 7 Noahide laws, and one of the 7 Noahide laws is you cannot sleep with animals. Bestiality is asur for Bnei Noach as well, and hence if you give your animal to them, you're putting a stumbling block in front of them, right? Then the Gemara immediately asked from a Braita that you see you could buy for korbanot from the goyim. And the Gemara went to answer 3 different answers. What exactly is the difference? We mentioned the first answer was that for their own animals they're very careful because it was believed to basically make the animal incapable of priyavrivya, of reproducing. We're going to get back to that today again. And with your animals, they're not as careful, and so on and so forth. And the Gemara, one thing led to another. In the third answer, the Gemara brought a machloket Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim in Masechet Para. Rabbi Eliezer said that you cannot buy para aduma, a red heifer, from goyim. And the Gemara went through the whole story of Dama ben Netina and him as a goy having owned a para aduma that Chazal wanted to buy from him, and we went back and forth how that was possible. And then the Gemara said, well, Rabbi Eliezer doesn't hold that you can't just buy para aduma from the goyim, just red heifer, but any animal, any korban he holds he cannot buy from the goyim. And the Gemara started going through the whole Tanakh, saying, well, you find this place that they bought it, that place that they bought it, the other, but Yitro brought it, by Moshe Rabbeinu talking to Paro, he says, we got to take from you. All of these things, how you deal with them. And one by one, the Gemara knocked them off, and we are up to the greatest example. The greatest example is what happened in Shmuel Aleph. If anyone could give me a Shmuel Aleph, actually, in the back Bet Midrash, I would read some of the Psukim there. In Shmuel Aleph, there was this story that one time that the Jews fought the Plishtim, they actually lost the battle. And this is in the time of Adiyah Kohen, the 2 sons, unfortunately, were killed. And the Aron was Nishba. The Aron of Hashem was taken captive to Plishtim. That was considered the greatest thing for them to get. They were so proud of themselves, they would pray this in all of their cities and the streets. But what happened immediately afterwards was any city that they would bring the Aron in, everyone would get techorim. They would get horrible sicknesses, like obviously not something natural to the Rabbah. Obviously not something natural, and then they put it in next to Dagon, their Avodah Zarah that they served. It was called Dagon because in parts it looked like a fish. And then the tomorrow morning they come and all the pieces are cut off in front and fell in front. The head fell in front of the Aron in that room without anyone having entered. They checked all the CC cameras. No one had entered inside, and it was clearly like. And at some point they say, "Wait a second, this is not working. This is clearly the God of the Jews hitting us." And at some point, the Kumarim said, enough is enough. Don't you remember what God did to Paro? Which is going to become actually very significant right now in the story that we're going to read. I think it's in Perek Vav. And so they said enough is enough. Let's send this Aaron back to the Jews, which would be like the ultimate defeat emotionally for the Pelishtim. So here it is. They brought the Vayomru ma shama shenashiv lo. Vayomru mispar sarnei Pelishtim 5 tchorei zahav, 5 achbarei zahav, ki magefa achad lekulam. And the pasuk says they did all of this, and they wanted to give kavod to Elokei Israel. And the language is ve'asitem salmei techorim techorehem ve'salmei achbarehem hamashchitim et haaretz, because they were being attacked by these things. Untatem le'elokei Israel kavod, give kavod to Hashem, the God of the Jews. This is the Pelishtim saying it. Ulai yakel yado marachem, maybe he's going to take off his hand from you, right? That's how badly they were affected. Ume'al Elohechem, ume'al arsechem. Ve'lama, listen to this. Ve'lama techabedu et levavchem. The Kumarim are telling, why are you hardening your heart so much, not letting the Aron of the Jews go back to its place? Kasher kibdu Misraim uParo et dibam. You're doing the same thing that Paro did and Egyptians did. Hashem was hitting them, and they were saying, nope. And then hit after hit after hit, makkah after makkah after makkah. So he said, learn some Jewish history, guys. Send this Aaron go on its way. He made a joke out of the Egyptians. He's making a joke out of you again. Let this go. So, this is the etzah that they gave them, and this is what they actually ended up doing. Make a brand new chariot, beautiful carriage. And ushte parot alot, asher lo ala aleim od, take 2 cows that have never been put a yoke on, strong and nice, and attach them to this agala. Ve'ashevotem berehem ma'acharehem habaitam. You put the Aaron basically on this beautiful chariot, new chariot, and let it go. So what they did was, and I don't want to read a whole lot of this, but you can read it. This is in Shmuel Aleph, Perek Vav, in the beginning, towards the end, until towards the end. They put the Aaron. They made this thing. They put the Aaron on it. They put the 2 cows. These 2 cows had babies. They had baby calves, right? And they wanted to know if this is miraculous or not. So they took the babies away from the mothers. They locked them up in the room. The cows knew where their babies are. In nature, would the mother cow leave? Absolutely not. But they put them in, and right away the GPS kicked in, and they started going towards Eretz Yisrael Yashar, without lo satu yamin usmo. They didn't go right or left. Mamash like better than Google. Google makes mistakes many times. They went straight to Eretz Yisrael. Right? This is exactly what happened. And they went and they stayed, they stopped. And when they got to Bet Shemesh, B'mesila achad halchu, they went on one path without getting confused. Haloch ve'gao, they went and they were making loud noise. Ve'lo saru yaminu small, the entire time they were singing, as we were going to see in a moment. Ve'lo saru yaminu small, they didn't go left or right. And all the advisors, the highest officials of the Pelishtim, walking behind this carriage with these cows, seeing what's going to happen at Gevul Bet Shemesh. Until Bet Shemesh they went, right? And Bet Shemesh, the people are harvesting their things, and they see, lo and behold, the golden, can't miss it, the golden Aron with the keruvim on top is there. They were very happy, right? And then the pasuk goes on to say, they took this, they used the Atzei, the woods of this new carriage, they used it as fuel, and they brought both of these parot as korbanot on their bama and their mizbeach, and that was part of the celebration that they had. So of course, it's a beautiful story, right? You gotta learn Tanakh. Tanakh is amazing, right? The best Musa Sefer also is Nach. One of the tachsisei Tanakh, one of the things that a shochet has to know, surprisingly, right? In Hilchot Shechita, one of the things that a shochet has to know is he has to be baki in Kavdalet Sifrei Tanakh, in all Tanakh. Why? Because it gives Yirat Shamayim to the person. It's tremendous, right? Anyhow, so that's one of the stories that there. But after the beautiful story kicks in, you say, wait a second, how did they bring this parot as a korban? You just told me you cannot buy, well, because they may be sodomized. How do you know they're not? So this is Plishtim. Plishtim are not so sanua necessarily, right? So how in the world did you bring that? And that's going to be the best question. The Gemara has to grapple with this, and the Gemara is going to answer it. So says the Gemara, 16 lines down. So yes, they used to bring the Aron to the war. Not necessarily there are two Aronot. That's a different discussion for itself. They brought these two cows, these two parot, as korban ola to Hashem. So says the Gemara, Horat Shahaita. Gemara says you're correct. It's a problem. They should not have brought them. But because of all the nisim that happened, and again, partially I told you what it is, and part of it we're going to learn more. Because of that, there was a hora'at shah. What's a hora'at shah? That's something that normally would be a problem, but a one-time allowance. For instance, what's the biggest hora'at shah that we learned previously was Eliyahu Behara Karmel, right? In Melachim Aleph Perek Yutet, there it says that Eliyahu Hanavi, after 3 years of drought, when he faced off with the king of Israel and the queen, right, Izebel and Achav, they basically had an official face-off in front of all of the Jews to see if the Avodah Zarah is right or is the Navi right? That's the, and they both built mizbechot, altars, and they brought korbanot. And where was this happening on? On top of Hara Karmel, Eliyahu Behara Karmel, right? That's asur. Since when you have a Bet HaMikdash, you cannot bring korbanot outside the place of the Bet HaMikdash, but it was hora'at shah. Sometimes certain things are needed, and you have a navi, you have a system of overriding for one-time thing. This was that time. Normally speaking, will be asur because the animal could be sodomized, and that's asur for korban. But here was mutar because all the nisim that happened, they allowed it. So says the Gemara. This also makes sense because the ilot mahachi, if you don't say that this was hora'at shah, was a one-time psak, ola nekeva miika. We never have korban ola, a female animal. What korban is female animal? Anyone knows? Korban chatat. Good. Korban chatat is female. Korban ola always is zachar. Always. And these clearly were parot. They were female mother cows. They had babies. The bedavka chose it like that. And a female cow cannot be a korban ola. So how in the world they brought this as ola? Must be this was a one-time thing because of the context of the story that happened. So says the Gemara, Umay kushya. And what's the question? Dilma bebamat yachid. Maybe it was on a Bamat Yachid. Uchter of Ada Bar Ava. What's Bamat Yachid, by the way? When you have the Bet HaMikdash, you're not allowed to bring on private altars. There's a Isur of Bamot, Shchute Chutz, Isur Karet. There are a lot of problems with it, right? But when the Bet HaMikdash was not there, you had Bamat Yachid and you had Bamat Rabim. You had places of people bringing korbanot. You had them in Shiloh and as the format of Mishkan as Bamat Rabim, and then you had in your backyard you could make a Bama, right? You could. Once the Beit HaMikdash was built, then you cannot do. That's a whole sugya with psukim with drashot. But nevertheless, this is the time of before Beit HaMikdash. Remember, this is not before David HaMelech, before Shlomo HaMelech. There's no Beit HaMikdash. So people could have Bamat Yachid, right? So maybe this was in Bamat Yachid. In other words, when you had in Bet Shemesh, these cows came with the Aron, maybe right there and then they made a Bamat Yachid and Yalla. And Bamat Yachid, you could do. You don't have to be bound by all of the rules and regulations of regular korbanot. So maybe you could bring a para, a nekeva, as your korban ola as well. So says the Gemara, taught. How do you know that you could bring a female ola on bamat yachid? It's only asur in Bet HaMikdash. But in a regular Bamat Yahid, you could bring it. In a personal altar, you could bring it. Shenemar, Vaikach Shmuel, Telech alav echad, V'yalehu ola. Shmuel brought a regular sheep, a female, and brought it as ola. So here you find Navi Shmuel bringing a korban ola from a female animal, right? So says the Gemara, wait a second, that's not a female. It says V'yalehu. For all the grammar gurus, V'yalehu means what? Male. Male, of course. V'yalehu ola. So the Gemara says, who said that he was a female? He was a male. The Gemara says, no. I love and I appreciate your grammar guru-ness, but if you take a look at the pasuk, it's written in a very unusual way. It's written with a hey, right? But if you take a look at your psukim on the side that you have, it probably says it the way it's written in the Tanakh. Yeah, it is, by mine at least. If you take a look, it's written not Vav, Yud, Ayin, Lamed, Hey, Vav. It's missing the last Vav. It says it's written Vayaleha, but we read it Vayalehu. So Mara says, well, do you know why it says Vayaleha? It's telling you that it's not that it had gender dysphoria that was confusing, but it was a nekeva. It was a korban nekeva, but the pasuk says ve'alehu because ola normally has to be a zachar, but this particular one was nekeva. So you see that you could bring it. So says the Gemara. Ve'yalehu zachar mashma Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak ve'aleh ketiv. It says ve'aleh was nekeva. So therefore, the Gemara says, basically, that this was a hora'at sha'ah. You could bring it on a bamat yachid, but nevertheless, in this case, was hora'at sha'ah. Now, Rabbi Yochanan goes back to what we said before. Let's refresh our memory. The first answer that the Gemara ever gave of whether or not you could buy an animal for korban from the goyim was that yes, they will be maybe acting with bestiality with your animal, but they're not going to do it with their own animal, right? That was the first answer of the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan says even that's not so pashut. Says this that the general belief was that bestiality is going to damage your animal and it's going to render them incapable of reproduction. That's only within the first 3 years of their life. After 3 years, their body is already developed enough that bestiality would not really affect them, in most cases at least. So therefore, even the goyim who are careful with their own animals, it's only within the first 3 years. Afterwards, and that would be a new level of answer, because this that the Mishnah says, you can't leave your animal with the goyim, it's talking about your animals. But this that you could buy from them is only, even that is only before 3 years. After 3 years of age, you can't buy even from their own animals. You cannot buy. Now the Gemara has to go through all these questions that the Gemara asked before.
The harashah, we answered the male female, but what about the fact that there might be a sodomized animal?
No, that's the question. The question was, it may be sodomized. Why did he use them? right? And the Gemara says this was Horat Shah based on all the nisim that happened. I'm not sure exactly if it means that they knew it was not sodomized because of all the nisim that happened, or that this was an override based on the nisim that happened. Now the Gemara is going to ask a new question, because this korbanot that they brought, right? This korbanot that they brought, they had babies. These two cows, we just mentioned this story, they chose female cows that they had a baby. Can a cow have babies before age of 3? The Gemara seems to say that they won't. And hence, the Gemara says they were for sure more than 3 years of age, and they could be sodomized even by their own owners. So then, how did they bring them as korban, right? We're going to come back to that question in just a moment. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Gevul Yeshla, Pechuta mi bat shalosh shanim nekeret. Less than 3 years of age, the animal will be damaged if it's sodomized. But bat shalosh shanim ena nekeret. If it's already over the age of 3, then it's not going to be affected by bestiality. It's not going to be nekeret. So says the Gemara, all of these stories that we had in Tanakh, they asked Rabbi Yochanan, and he gave a blanket answer to all of them. So all of these were less than 3 years of age, right? It was less than 3. The one that he got stuck with was what? The story that we just mentioned in Shemuel, by the 2 cows that they were carrying the Aron of Hashem. And says the Gemara, Tashema, these 2 cows that they brought as korban olah to Hashem, you cannot possibly say that they were less than 3. Rabbi Yochanan is going to get stuck with this one. Why? He tried. He said, you must say that it was less than 3 years. Matkifla Ravuna. Ravuna asked Rabbi Yochanan, Bered Rav Natan, Imken, Hainu ve'et benehem kalu bebayit, that they locked up their children, their calves, in the house to see if they're going to still stay there or go miraculously. So says the Gemara, still the Gemara pushes back, says maybe it was less than 3 and they still had children. And the Gemara says, well, less than 3 years of age, a cow gives birth? Says the Gemara. Says the Gemara, we learned, para v'chamor, cow and donkey, mibat shalosh vaday lekohen. If you buy a cow from a goy, or a donkey from a goy, so you don't know the history of this cow, you don't know what has happened with it, and then the cow is pregnant, you know the age of the cow, gets pregnant, and you're scratching your head, wait a second, is this kid going to be bechor? Because a bechor of a donkey, a mule, you have to have a pidyon peter chamor, right? And a bechor of a cow also has its own rules and regulations. So how do you know what the history of this is? You just bought this 6 months ago. You don't know, maybe it had a child before, and this is not a bechor. Maybe it is a bechor, maybe it's not a bechor. So says the Gemara, if it's less than 3 years of age, this is most definitely their bechor, because they can't have children less than that, right? If they're having a child by 3 years of age, this child is the first one, right? Mikan va'elach, from there on is safek. If it's older than 3 years of age, then it's safek. You don't know. Maybe it's the first one, maybe it's not the first one, right? Says the Gemara, so therefore, what does that mean? That means these 2 cows that the Pelishtim sent with the Aron that had already children, they must most definitely be older than 3, and therefore they would be subject to the Isur of Korban, getting Korbanot from Goyim, because bestiality would not affect them, would not render them Akar, and hence we would be concerned maybe they were sodomized, right? So therefore the Gemara says, you know what, you're correct. We have to go back to original answer, and that's what the Gemara sticks with, that this was not a scenario of heter. Normally speaking, this would be asur, and this was a specific hora'at shah, a one-time allowance based on all the nisim that happened with this story. And now we're going to study a little bit more about the nisim that happened. Now the Gemara digressed from this. Now the Gemara is going to digress from its digression and go a whole amud of just pure agata, beautiful agata about this story that we just read, and that's partially why I wanted you to get acquainted with this story before we start the Gemara. Now,
how do we know it's older than 3? I didn't catch how do we know it's older than 3?
No, the Gemara says it. The Gemara says, we learned this in a Braita, that in the halachot of Peter Chamor, if you bought a donkey from a goy or a cow from a goy, you just know the age. You don't know the history if they had children or not. Okay. And they get pregnant, that first pregnancy is that pregnancy that by you is the first, right? It is its first pregnancy because it's only 3 years of age. You cannot have had children before. Right? So therefore, those cows that they sent, because the pasuk says that they had children, they must have been over 3 years of age. Rabbi Yochanan the Gemara wanted to suggest they must have been less than 3, and therefore it was mutar. The Gemara says, no, it can't be that they were less than 3 because they had children. And less than 3, they would not have children. So once they're 3, we already know that Rabbi Yochanan said over 3, they could be sodomized and not be affected with akar, and therefore the goyim would act with bestiality with them. Right? So says the Gemara. The Gemara says, "Vayasharna parot bederech." The pasuk says, "Vayasharna parot." This parot, vayasharna. Vayasharna could be from the language of yashar, like Rashi says. They went straight. They did not. You have seen cows ever, right? In actual real life, we used to travel once a year. For those who are from Tehran, we go to the northern parts of Iran, Babul Sar and Yoshar parts. Or the north, basically, and there are many places there that there's still people. They live. They're farmers and they have cows and so on. And sometimes in the street, the cows are going. If you see a cow, they don't go straight. They walk. They stop. They go left. They go right. They're going from Eretz Pelishtim to Eretz Yisrael by Bet Shemesh, and they went mamash straight. That's the simple understanding of the pasuk. But the way it's written, Vatasharna, right? Vayasharna is almost reminiscent of a tashar devora, which means singing, right? Melashon shir, not melashon yashar. So the Gemara darshins that. The Gemara says that's exactly what happened. These cows were, first of all, forget about the Gemara's drasha. In the pasuk itself, it says that immediately once they put the aron on them, they started making loud noise, and the entire time they were not quiet. That much is clearly in the, that much is clearly in the pasuk. Now the Gemara, based on this pasuk of Yasharna, says that was not just a thing. This was a true miraculous incident that was completely filled with nisim. This whole experience of Pelishtim with the Aron of Hashem, that everywhere that he went, everyone got attacked and everyone got sick, internally sick, and then the Avodah Zarah was broken to pieces, and the head of Avodah Zarah, everything was miraculous, including this last piece, that not only they went yashar straight, but they also were singing, right? They were singing, now, not singing, shveki songs, but they were actually saying praises of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in a very interesting context. So let's actually study this. Started at least today, and we will complete it tomorrow. Says the Gemara, "Vayasharna parot b'derech haderech bet shemesh." My vayasharna. What is the word vayasharna? Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Meir. In the name of Rabbi Meir Baal Hanes, she'amru shira. They said shira. Rav Zutra bar Tuvia Amar Rav sheyashru peneim keneged Aron. He says not only that, they also turned around their face. Imagine now the cows are going. There's a cage in the back with the Aron on top. They're going straight, but they're not looking. They're looking at the Aron and walking straight, right? They're looking at the Aron. Ve'amru shira umay shira. What's the shira that they said? Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Meir. Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Yisrael. They said the Shirah of Az Yashir. Now, the reason I read to you in the very beginning of the Shiur, parts of the Psukim of how the priests of Avodah Zarah, of the Dagon, they said to the Plishtim, we are becoming like the Egyptians. The reason I read that to you was because of this Gemara. Because it's not just random that they were saying Az Yashir. This was almost like a replay of the Yetziat Mitzrayim in such way that they held the Jews back, and then Hashem had to hit them until they let them go. Here, they're keeping the connection of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah, back, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to hit them to let go, and they are letting go of that by itself as the Egyptians let go of the Jews. So therefore, it's very apropos to sing the same song as the Jews sang when the Egyptians completely let go of them by the Yam Suf. And here also is the same thing that they sang as Yashir. The Gemara is going to have multiple other ideas here, which Bezrat Hashem will read, and we'll discuss each one of them in the next shiur. Chazaku Baruch.